the West. And tonight we have a special guest on the podcast. He is the current mayor of El Cajon here in San Diego County, and he is running for the 51st Congressional District here in California. Mr. Mayor Bill Wells. I put too many salutations, Mr. Mayor Bill Wells. I just didn't add the Honorable Mr. Mayor Bill Wells. How are you tonight, Bill?
I'm good. Nice to see you, Phil and Camille.
Nice to see you as well. You have the rare honor of being one of the few federal candidates we have on the show. We do like to focus a lot on state, but we do make exceptions. And I think you're a stellar candidate who has a lot to say. And I think you are someone of substance. So it's great to have you on the podcast. For those who don't know, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself?
My name is Bill Wells. I live in El Cajon. I'm the mayor of the city of El Cajon. I've been mayor since 2013. And before that, I was on the city council in 2008. I'm a doctor of psychology, spent most of my life working in emergency psychiatric medicine. And I own a healthcare company, and I am married with 3 grown children and 4 grandchildren, twins on the way, so almost 6. And I'm running for Congress in the 51st because I'm extremely worried about the state of the world and the country. And I felt that I had the ability to take out somebody who is a really hardcore radical leftist. And I felt like it was my obligation to do so. So that's, in a nutshell, that's me.
And who is your opponent right now?
Sarah Jacobs.
Sarah Jacobs of the famous Jacobs family, right here in San Diego.
Yes, the Qualcomm family. She's got a few dollars, so that's keep pointing it out to me that she's rich. Like if we didn't already know. If you live in San Diego County, you're well aware of her and her family. Most of the buildings I go into, at least, are partially endowed by her family in some way. So. And they've done great things that they should be proud of in San Diego. But them less accomplished. We can talk about that.
Them or the Spanos family. I feel like those are the 2 families here in San Diego anyone should know of. I want to talk a little bit about. I think you did obviously been mayor since 2013, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like you kind of stepped onto a bigger stage during COVID. And I think that's partially due to the fact that you were one of the few outspoken mayors who, when all these lockdowns and all these restrictions came into place, you were one of the few mayors who stood up and said, nope, not going to enforce it, not going to punish my businesses. I'm going to make that stand. Do you want to talk about that a little bit as a mayor during COVID, what that was like?
Yeah, I do. First off, I should say that. So I started off my adult life as a musician, and eventually I decided I had to figure out a way to make some more cash. So I got my RN, and then eventually got my doctorate in psychology. But when I was studying to be an RN, I had to learn a lot about infectious diseases, and I got very interested in the Spanish flu of 1918, and I studied quite a bit about that. So I kind of had some knowledge on my belt when we came to this pandemic. And my first thought was, wow, the Spanish flu killed 100 million people. If you extrapolate that out to the number of people that we have living on the earth today, we could be seeing 1 billion people die. And I was pretty concerned based upon, what they were telling all of us, that maybe 3% of the population that got this disease would perish. And so I kind of went along with everybody that said, let's have 2 weeks to flatten the curve and keep things under control, make sure our ICU beds were open and that our ventilator capacity was not being used. But then when we got past that 2 weeks, we started going to 3 and 4 weeks. A couple of things happened. First off, like I think most people, I didn't have a lot to do. It was shut down. So I spent a lot of time researching. And it became pretty clear to me that if you could wade through all the propaganda, that most people that were dying of this disease were people that were 70 years and older. And very few younger people were dying. There were some people my age that were dying, but most of those people had significant comorbidities. And pretty quickly, my attitude about it all began to change. Remember, in those early stages, I didn't really feel that it was a partisan issue. I think that came a little bit later. At this point, I'm still thinking of it as a medical issue. And so I started asking questions. Well, why are we shutting down the economy and ruining people's businesses and ruining their family lives and causing mental health concerns when the vast majority of the people that get this disease will be fine? And I thought, well, what we should do is be locking down the people that were 70 years of age and older and telling other people, if you want to open your restaurant, if you want to go to work, go. And if you don't feel safe, then stay home, but make it more of a freedom of choice issue. And then I started getting phone calls and emails and texts from people throughout my city and people that I knew. I think because they know that I am a mental health professional, I as it always is for me, people tell me their dark secrets, and I started getting a lot of people telling me how suicidal they were and how they were seeing more alcoholism in their family and more domestic abuse in their family, and how the kids were not faring well, not going to school. And then I started really thinking, well, I've got to do something about this. And I think that the straw that broke the camel's back for me was Bob Taylor called me. I don't know if you ever heard of Taylor Guitars.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
As a guitarist, I love great guitars.
Yeah. And Taylor is probably the best acoustic guitar in the world. It's up there with Martin. But Bob called me and said, hey, I just got to tell you, I'm getting ready to shut down, but I don't think I really want to. And if I do, it's going to cost me, and he gave me a very large number. I don't want to rat him out, but it was a huge number. It's going to cost me this much money. And I said, Bob, I don't see why you need the shutdown. And he said, yeah, but if I don't, somebody's going to come up and arrest me or, lock the place down. And I said, well, who would do that, Bob? That would be me, because you're in El Cajon. We have our own police department. We don't take orders from anybody else. And then suddenly occurred to me, I had the power to help people in a different way. And so next day I had a news conference, and I told our police department to no longer enforce COVID regulations, to no longer enforce mask restrictions, and to allow people to live the way they wanted to live without fear of the police coming in, arresting them, or giving them a ticket. And that's specifically, also for the churches. That was a big deal for me. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we had Mayor Will O'Neill on a couple weeks ago, and he kind of went through the same thing where he said, look, we're not going to go forward with this because police are busy enough in our cities. They don't need to do all of this. And on top of that, start enforcing shutting down businesses that they probably know people, or they're probably friendly with these people, and enforcing mask regulations. Did you see that sort of, that was more, I guess you could say, yeah, it's about the freedom. It's about letting people live their lives, but police also had their own burdens that they had to do. So it's more important they focused on public safety rather than these restrictions, right?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. We have our own police department. And even though we have 120 sworn officers, at any given time, we only have 5 or 6 police officers on the street. They're backed up by sergeants and captains and lieutenants that work in the office. But, the guys out in the cars patrolling the neighborhoods is 5 or 6 people. And we were being inundated by phone calls saying, there's a guy walking down the street without a mask, go get him. And, there's somebody, I saw somebody sneak somebody into the back of their hair salon for a haircutting appointment, take the SWAT team and go get them. Yeah. And we were, at some point, when I talked to my city manager about my plan, he said, well, you know what, I'm with you, because we're not doing it anyway, to be honest. A lot of it was symbolic. A lot of it was just telling people, hey, I hear you. And you're not crazy. There's so much gaslighting going on during that, where people were just saying, "Oh, no. If you're not complying with this, you're a menace to society. You're dangerous, and you're stupid." And so many people were saying, "Guy, am I the only one who thinks that this is a little nutty?" And so I think that was the symbolic part of that was just as important as the reality part of it, because people needed somebody in authority to stand up and say, "Yeah, I I don't think you're wrong about this. I think there's some valid concerns.
Before we focus on probably the reaction that you got from outer forces in California, what was the reaction like sort of on the ground level? Did you see a lot of people kind of escaping to El Cajon to go enjoy life as it was pre-COVID, like going to restaurants and doing their thing? Like, did you see a lot of that happen in El Cajon?
Yeah, lots of stories like that. I mean, I think one of the first things I noticed that the churches who really didn't know, and the church and the synagogues who didn't really know how to deal with this problem, they were very frustrated, because remember, the churches were saying that they weren't essential, where strip clubs and pot shops were considered essential, and they were sending me angry emails saying, why is the church being shut down? I think that when they saw me stand up and said, "Hey, I've got your back," they felt empowered and emboldened to start staying open, and that's what we saw. We've got a lot of big churches in El Cajon, and several of them just defied the law and stayed open. So that was good. But some of the restaurants did the same thing. It really depended on what I found out later. I think we all realized a lot of it had to do with your political bent. It quickly became clear to me that conservatives were ready to fight against this, that leftists were really, really wanting to embrace it and really liked it. And so, like any diverse population, and we're actually, my city, even though I've a Republican mayor and I've been pretty popular here, we're outnumbered by Democrats by just about 2%. So, we saw plenty of restaurants saying, no, we're going to stay closed. But the ones who did stay open were very happy about it. And it's funny, I got a funny story for you. I don't know if we have time for this, but
we got time. We got plenty of time.
So I was at a restaurant kind of as the whole thing was ending, where people were coming back into restaurants again. And this lady came up to my table and she said, "Oh, I'm so excited to see you. And thank you so much for what you do with COVID." I said, "Yeah, sure. Of course. You're welcome." She said, "Whenever anybody gives me a hard time, I just show them your picture. And then I tell them my mayor says that I don't have to wear a mask." And I said, "Okay." I said, "You have a picture of me?" And she said, "Oh yeah." And she had this like badge for her work, and she turned it around. There was my picture, and she kept it around her neck like a talisman to ward off the evil people that wanted to make her wear a mask. That was a funny story, but it was a controversial decision, but I'd say overall, probably 70-80% of the people were very encouraging about it, very happy about it.
Yeah, and it's if I could tell an interesting story of there was a restaurant in National City that kind of became like a speakeasy sushi.
Sure.
And once people started to find out about like, oh, this place is actually serving, and you could go in there and sit down and have a normal meal like before COVID. The place was packed. You go there, it was absolutely packed. People loved it. They told me a story that even the police chief of National City was like, they were coming there and having lunch and dinner and like, because they chose it. But it was funny because we went initially and you could tell, like to your point about, you could tell who the political bent was. People who were there, you probably had an idea of where they landed on the political spectrum. But then it got to a point where family members of ours who are on the opposite end of the political spectrum, the longer COVID went on, all of a sudden they went from the camp of we're never going out, we're going to do all this, we're going to social distance and no one can come into our house and blah, blah, blah. Several months later, all of a sudden they're going, so what's the name of this restaurant that you go to that we can come out? We're looking for like a normal meal. So it's interesting how people kind of shifted over time to be like, okay, this is normal. This isn't as scary. And I think that's thanks in part to people like you who kind of stood up and said, no, this is crazy. We should be free to do these decisions as we see fit. And to all those restaurants that were like, no, we're going to stay closed, we're going to do this. Sure, that's your freedom, that's your prerogative. But to put it on other people to say, well, everyone has to stay closed, I think that was where the line was for a lot of people, was let people live their lives, let them make their decisions and live with that risk, right?
Absolutely. Through the process, I really want to understand the way people thought. And I started studying totalitarianism because I smelled totalitarianism in this. And there's a book that I found called The Psychology of Totalitarianism by a guy named Matthias Desmet. And he is a psychologist. And he wrote about mass formation psychosis and how this particular thing that we saw with COVID has happened multiple times throughout history. And it always follows kind of a similar pattern. If you or your listeners are ever interested in a really comprehensively great book about how this kind of happens psychologically, I recommend that.
Oh, I'm definitely going to read that. as soon as you start that, I'm like, oh yeah, this is up my alley.
Say it one more time for the listener. What was the name of the book?
The Psychology of Totalitarianism.
Psychology of Totalitarianism. Oops, sorry. My dog's a little...
Mass formation psychosis.
That sounds
I think I'm going to have to add it to my list. Sorry, my dog's a little upset right now about something. Probably our new neighbors.
Mine's locked out of the room because if the UPS driver comes, Armageddon. So
well, we just moved, so she's getting used to the whole neighborhood, and I guess there's new dogs across the street.
So don't worry about it.
So now I want to kind of move into your decision to go from mayor of El Cajon and decide I want to run for Congress. What made you just pick Congress over maybe assembly or state senate or something like that?
Part of that's practicality. I'm on SANDAG right now, San Diego Association of Government, and I'm in the deep minority there, and I don't enjoy that very much. It's nice to stand up for your principles and try to protect people, but boy, just get ignored and beaten down constantly. So the idea of going and doing that for, my golden years to be in Sacramento, being treated like a bug, it wasn't particularly appealing to me. And frankly, I was getting a lot done as mayor. So it didn't seem like a good trade to me to go and not get anything done in Sacramento when I could get lots done to protect people as mayor. And so I was happy to stay as mayor. But as we were talking about COVID, it became really clear to me that COVID was a test run of sorts for seeing what the tolerance level was for totalitarian thought and totalitarian impulses in America. And I was very disturbed to see how easily people were willing to give away their freedom and willing to give away their rights for a little bit of security, not even real security, but the promise of security. Oh, you let us have your rights, you let us have your freedom, and we're going to keep you safe from this disease. And that really bothered me. And of course, right after that, Biden won the presidency, and he had promised to come in as a unifier. And obviously, at least in my opinion, he did not come in as a unifier. He came as somebody who was extremely prejudiced against half the country, really hated half the country, and went on a rampage, I think, to try to destroy the Judeo-Christian ethic that this country was founded on and has always enjoyed. Well, all of our laws are based on, most of our customs are based on. And I, like a lot of people, was very unhappy about that. So my consultant, who's been with me for a long time, is usually kind of a gloomy Gus kind of guy. He doesn't usually come and tell me that we're going to do great things. He usually comes and says, oh, we can't win, we're going to lose. That won't work. He came to me and said, we should look at this seat. She's way too liberal for the district. She does have a high Democrat registration advantage, but the people of the district don't vote like that. They vote for conservative things, and they're going to like you a lot more than they like her. And then when I started really letting that ruminate in my mind, it really became clear to me that I had an obligation to run. See, life's been good to me. I've got a great wife, a great family. I've got a business that supports me well. I could retire and go enjoy myself, but I think I'm in this position. How many people are in the position in San Diego County to take out Sarah Jacobs, a 34-year-old billionaire? And even though it's going to be a heavy lift for me, I could do it. And when I started really looking into her and realizing how incredible leftist she is, basically a communist, I said, I have an obligation to my kids and my grandkids and everybody I love to try to do my best and try to win this thing. So that's what got me into it.
Yeah, I mean, that does make more practicality sense in terms of running for Congress, and I could understand where going to Sacramento could probably feel like you're just pushing a boulder up a hill that's going to come down and crush you anyway. So I had a good question, Camille. If you have any good questions, jump in here, because
Sarah, she's currently in office right now, right?
She's in her third year,
and I was looking that district flips back and forth like every couple terms. Yes, am I correct? It seems like
no. I don't want to correct you, but yeah, it's
no. Please correct me.
No, it's been firmly entrenched. Well, first off, one of the reasons you probably think that is because it was recently gerrymandered.
Right.
So, it is the makeup of the district has changed.
Okay.
So Darrell Iss's seat right now was a lot of the 51st was in Darrell Iss's district, is now not. So that is probably what you're thinking about. But before Sarah Jacobs was Susan Davis. I think she was there for like 25 years. Pretty hardcore leftist as well. But what's interesting is that a conservative with real credentials has never run in this race. Mm. They've just kind of assumed that it's unwinnable, and it's a pretty daunting task to run for Congress. I think most people won't do it unless they're very assured that they're going to win. To go on and take a heavily Democrat seat and to kind of burn your political capital and raise a couple $1 million that that may not end up in a win. I think a lot of people think about their career and they say, well, this is not what I want to do for my career. But I think differently. I never intended to be a politician. I fell into this. I always felt like when the people were tired of me, they would send me home. That's why when I had to make the decision about COVID, I didn't listen to any of my advisors. I said, I'm going to do what I think is the right thing to do. And that's always served me well. So I just am the right kind of person to run for this, because if this ends up being a disaster for me, which I don't think it will be, but if it did end up being a disaster for me and people said he's a big loser because he can't win the congressional race, I could retire. I'd be okay with that. So
you're not also just a random who's like, I'm going to run for Congress. You've put your time in, you've worked your way up. And like you said, the makeup's kind of changed. I feel like the makeup has changed, especially in California, where everyone is getting fed up at this point with everything, with the politics. And so you're right that like the time is ripe for you.
You're absolutely right.
Not a race that we don't run in.
I think there's guys like me and women too, men and women all around the country who are taking on incumbents right now, taking on people that were thought to be unbeatable, and they're going to win in November. Just like we're seeing France turn more conservative and Italy turn more conservative and Sweden and Brazil and Argentina. And I think Canada is moving back to the right. I think there is an unstoppable force happening in the world right now. I kind of liken it to a college basketball game where, maybe at halftime everybody's kind of tied up, but somewhere in the third quarter, one team just catches on fire, and it's clear to anybody who's watching, oh, they're going to win. It's inevitable. And that's how I feel about conservatism right now.
that was my question, or my comment was, it's interesting in California how people will vote because there's a D next to someone's name, but when it comes to actual issues, it's always interesting to look at how voters break. And we see a lot of that with like propositions, where propositions will propose a new tax and then it'll get voted down. Or they'll propose some policy, social policy that people look at and go, nah, we're voting that down. So it's always interesting that there's this kind of disconnect between, well, people in California actually support these ideas, but it just takes the right messenger to kind of come and bring those to the people. And especially in your district, like you're saying, they vote conservative. So you have to be the messenger who comes out and says, hey, I'm your guy to kind of implement these things you're already voting for.
Well, the first thing I have to do is not come at them with the Republican maxim of Republicans good and pure and Democrats evil and stupid. And, you know, I can tell you, when I'm on the dais, people oftentimes come up to me at a council meeting and say, okay, first off, I want to tell you you're a Nazi and a fascist. And, you know, and I know you're not going to do anything to help me, but let me rip into it. You know, I mean, they're right. I'm kind of like, I cut them off. Once they call me a Nazi and a fascist, I'm pretty much not listening anymore. And I think Republicans do that too much to Democrats. I understand why people are angry, but I think for the most part, Democrats are good people, and independents as well. I think we have to reach out to them and talk to them in a way that is not trying to talk them into being like us, but into saying that there's common ground where we can all agree on important issues.
Yeah.
And then kind of remind them, say some of the issues that you think are so important are not really that important. Abortion is to me the number one. Now, I hear people screaming all over California saying abortion's super important, but in California it's not. It's codified into the Constitution. There's not anything I or anybody else could do to make more or less abortions in California. The Supreme Court has said that it's a states' rights issue. But you watch, my opponent is going to spend 90% of her oxygen talking about abortion rights, even though it does not affect a single human being in California.
Yeah, and to your point, before I get to the next thing that I want to bring up, just like not all Democrats are bad, I think it's also important, and we on this show, sometimes we get flack for pointing out that not all Republicans are inherently good and that you should just implicitly trust them. I think you should listen to them as well and hear what they have to say and make sure that they're of substance, that they're actually doing it for the right reasons, that they're not out here doing it for the wrong reasons or, you know, in glorification of themselves or anything like that. So I do want to go in and kind of make this switch now because
your show, you do whatever you want.
Well, actually, let me respond to that last point. If you want to respond to that about what I just said in terms of, you know, don't take everyone just because they're an RRD and just be blind faith. Like, just we have to take people as people.
We're never going to get out of our problems if it's all DNR. We're going to be at each other's throats for the next 100 years. I think people realize now that tactic is not working. So somebody's going to have to be the one who blinks first. And I think that this is a good time for Republicans to be magnanimous and say, we're willing to discuss things. We're willing to look at your point of view and give you the benefit of the doubt that you have something to say. I'm not coming at you with the same, we've got to meet halfway. So I don't necessarily think that. I think that there are some things that are so important that you have to remain true to your values, no matter what. But I think it's the way in which we talk to people, the way in which we defend our values is oftentimes by demonizing the other person and saying you're evil, you're stupid, you're without morals, and that's why you scum of the earth. That's why you're promoting the ideas that you're promoting. And I think we do that too much. And, I can see that the Democrats do it with us all the time, and it always frustrates me.
So now I want to pivot to, you had brought up what Sarah Jacobs is going to claim you're going to do in Congress. And I want our listeners to hear from you the difference between what happens when someone goes to Congress and what they are focused on, what they're working on, as opposed to people who are elected here in the state. Because I've heard a lot of congressional candidates say, well, if I'm elected to Congress, I'm going to come back to downtown LA and fix up Compton. And I'm like, okay, maybe that's not what you're really focused on, but explain to the viewers or listeners, what are the priorities of what you'll be working on as a representative in Congress in California?
Well, I think, to be completely honest, nobody knows until you get there, right? I have ideas about what Congress would be like, and they're probably no more educated than most people's ideas about what Congress would be like. But I have served in government for a long time, and I can tell you what I've done. And what I've done is try to represent the people that elected me. I try to make their lives better, and we try to do that by making sure the streets are safe. There's enough cops and firefighters. I have a balanced budget and a $70 million reserve. I think that's what people hired me to do, to be careful with the money so that we would be safe for decades into the future. These are the kind of things I would try to do in Congress as well. If I had the opportunity to have some pet projects, certainly mental illness has been a big issue for me all my adult life. And I would love to champion mental illness causes, and we could talk all night long about what those are specifically. But I also think that touches homelessness significantly. I believe that there's a lot the federal government can do about homelessness, and mostly it's the carrot and the stick approach, in the sense that California is indignant and says, we're going to do this social experiment, and we don't care that everybody hates it. We don't care that our constituents hate it. We don't care that the rest of the country hates it. We are proudly going to do this. In my opinion, I would lobby for cutting off funding to California. I would say, why should we give them health and human service money if they're going to let people die on the side of the road from drug addiction? Why are we going to give them transportation money if they are not doing anything positive for transportation? Forcing people out of their cars and doing things they don't want to do. Why should we participate in that as a federal government? And I would try to use pull the levers that it could pull to make things uncomfortable for California, so that they would start having more reasonable choices.
I want you to expand on the mental health, homelessness, et cetera, and the government's role. What do you feel is the government's role in that? How far should they go?
Well,
I mean, that's a really broad question, but
I write a lot about homelessness. I go speak a lot about homelessness. I'll try to distill it down into a very short little thing. But basically, the reason that we have so much homeless in California, which means we have 175,000 people on the streets of California, whereas the next closest states would be Texas and New York with 25,000 apiece. So we have about a fivefold more homeless people on the streets than other states do. And most states have a very small number. The reason that is California has decided that homelessness is a viable lifestyle. They wanted to encourage it. So they've encouraged it by changing the laws. It's almost impossible to arrest anybody for using drugs or selling drugs or stealing things or defecating on the streets or having sex out in the open or stealing bikes and just a litany of things, which I'm sure you've talked about in other podcasts. That was by design. California wanted to make it very easy to be homeless. Then they also passed a series of laws that said the cities are not allowed to do the normal things that cities would do to keep their streets safe. So we're not allowed to wake somebody up in their car sleeping. We're not allowed to arrest somebody for trespassing. We're not allowed to arrest people for committing vandalism. I mean, you can even have sex with an unconscious person and not get arrested. So they made it very easy to be homeless. And then on top of that, they give lots of money out. There's just massive amount of benefits. When I was doing psychiatric evaluations in the emergency rooms, I would get several people a night. They were coming from Arkansas and Louisiana and Tennessee. And I would say, why are you here in California? They say, because the benefits are so good. and you don't get in trouble for anything. So California has done that. Now, here's my cynical reasoning. I think they're doing it because there's so much money to be involved. Some people say they're doing it to tear society down to its studs. And maybe to some degree, that is kind of a communist utopian way of looking at it. But I also think there's a practical reason. And that is we've spent $25 billion on the Housing First project in California. Most of that money is going to NGOs, non-governmental organizations, which are all very closely aligned with labor and other Democrat politicians. And Democrat politicians swing massive amounts of money to labor and to the NGOs, who then swing massive amounts of money back to their campaigns. And this perpetual circle. And so the way to solve homelessness is, number one, admit that drug and alcohol addiction is the problem. It's not housing. It's not financial reasons. Number two, we have to change the laws so that the cities have the availability to arrest people when they refuse to get off the streets, when they commit crimes. And then number three, we're going to have to take that $25 billion and invest at least that much money again in rebuilding psychiatric institutions and treatment centers so that people can get off of the massive amount of drug and alcohol that they're involved in right now, which is going to be a pretty heavy lift.
Well, we had, to your point, we had done a whole episode a month ago. I feel like they all kind of blend together after a while. We had talked about where the heck all that $21 billion went. And we were flabbergasted when we watched the video of people testifying in Sacramento. And I believe it was, oh God, is it Phil Chang from the Bay Area, who is by no means a MAGA Republican, grilled these women who showed up and said, where did the money go? And they go, we don't know. And they just kind of shrug their shoulders. And he goes, you showed up to a hearing and you don't know where 21, they go, yeah, we have no idea where it went. So it is a money game. You follow the money and you see where it goes. If you're making $500,000 as the CEO of a nonprofit that helps homelessness, why would you ever want to solve homelessness? Because you'd be giving up your job of $500,000, right? Like it's a good gig to try and fight homelessness right now in California.
Especially it gets worse and worse every year, and people seem to have no problem with just throwing more billions at it. Every year they come back and say the same thing. If you just give us another, what you gave us last time plus a few more billion, we'll solve it this time. We're gonna fix it.
Yeah.
And people,
Yeah.
Or it's like
we just keep growing our homeless population. Yeah.
It's almost like the timing on Prop 1, they were able to get it before the voters, before that audit came out. And I think if it was flipped, there's no way Prop 1 would have passed if they saw $21 billion was wasted. And then they're asking for how much more money on top of that. I think that would have flipped. So they kind of got what they wanted, which was got ahead of the audit. Speaking of homelessness, I want to get your quick take on the Supreme Court ruling regarding homeless encampments, because I'm sure as mayor, you've dealt with that as well, and how that can affect homelessness and kind of tackling homelessness in places like California. Because right now you have everyone on the left is saying you've criminalized being homeless. Like you've, as Sotomayor said, you could either be homeless or there's no other option, you can just go kill yourself.
Yeah. So what Sotomayor said specifically was that sleep is a biological necessity and you can't criminalize people for sleeping. And that is so disingenuous and so myopic. She's missing the point completely. It's not that you're criminalized for sleeping. It's you're criminalized for not availing yourself of the shelter that's available to you. And I'll tell you what, so we have not allowed encampments on the streets in almost 5 years now. And we get away with that because we built a lot of homeless shelter beds. And we always generally have about 50 open beds. Probably tonight we have 50 open beds. And we'll probably have 600 people sleeping on the streets tonight. We go and talk to those people every day and say, hey, you want to get off the streets? They say, no, I don't want to go because they're not going to let me use drugs there. They're not going to let me bring my dog. They're not going to let me do whatever it is I want to do. And so people are not sleeping on the streets because they have no choice. They're sleeping on the streets because they prefer that lifestyle to the lifestyle of going into a program. And so I think that's a vastly different issue.
Again, to protect myself from my barking dog. Yeah, just in precaution, out of abundance of caution, because you never know when dogs are just going to jump up and start barking at something. So in Congress, you'll have, and I know you've spoken a lot about this and you've done a lot of videos about this. Congress and the federal government has exclusive jurisdiction over the border. It's no secret what's going on at the border here in San Diego County. And that's something you'll be able to hopefully work on as a member of Congress. Tell us a little bit about your ideas of what's going on at the border, and when you're elected to Congress, ideas you would have to propose or work with others for.
Yeah, thank you for the last part. Work with others. Yeah, I'm not so narcissistic as to think that I'm going to go and fix America's problems as the super congressman. But I do think that there's a shift happening. I think by the time I get to Washington, there's going to be enough realistic and common sense people that things can be done. I think that also means Donald Trump will be president. I think that the Senate will be in Republican hands. And I like democracy. I like there being a mix. I don't like California being a one-party state. But this is such a mess. I think we're going to have a few years of controlling all three branches of government to really make a difference. I think anybody to me, the people that say that the border is not a problem are the same people that say Joe Biden is not demented. They're saying, don't believe your eyes, don't believe what you're seeing on the TV cameras. Believe me when I tell you that this is not a problem. And, as we're seeing.
All those people crossing the border are just cheap fakes, right?
They're cheap fakes. Yes, yeah. And Steven Spielberg's, he was working for the other side, but, somebody, I don't know, is there a famous Republican director? I don't even know if there is.
Clint Eastwood?
Maybe Clint.
I don't think he understands CGI, though, for some reason.
Probably not. Anyway, look, this BS about the only reason they haven't fixed the border is because the Republican Congress won't fix it for them. I think anybody who's paying attention realizes that the border issue stems from executive orders from President Biden. President Biden does not want the border to be solved. He's vastly committed to changing the landscape, the political landscape, and sees this as a way to secure democratic rule for the next 100 years. And so that's why they're doing it. I think what we need to do is, it's not that complicated. We need to turn off the border. We need to turn off the broken pipe. And so we need to stop people from coming in. We need to tell people that if they want to apply for asylum, they've got to apply in the embassy that's closest to the country that they left, and wait to have a hearing and wait to have their trial so that they can be vetted and find out if they're really seeking asylum. And then if they are seeking asylum, or they provide some kind of special service to the country that we can't do without, then I say, sure, let them in. And we're always going to have immigration. I'm not talking about no immigration, but this kind of fill out an app half an hour before you get to the border and then sign a couple of papers and walk right through, be given a court date 5 years into the future. We're asking, this might be the biggest problem our country's ever faced.
Do you think when it comes to the issue of immigration right now, do you think Democrats in Washington are coming around to tougher immigration because it's a losing issue for them, or because we see right now Biden is polling so horribly on immigration, and I think it's on top of the economy and inflation. It's just immigration's one more thing that people are just like, well, why am I paying $18 for a Big Mac and the border's wide open as well? Like, something's going on here. This doesn't look right. Do you think Democrats are truly there are Democrats in Congress that are truly coming around to it from common sense, or do you think they're coming around because of politics and they see that they have to get a little bit tougher on it?
Well, Congress is a big place. I'm sure that there are Democrats that are very concerned about what's happening and would like to see a different approach. But having said that, the Democrats who are in charge I don't believe that they're serious about immigration in any way whatsoever. I think they're serious about retaining power. And so as we get to 4 months away from an election that looks like they're going to be slaughtered in almost every area, and immigration is a big part of that, the reason for that, I think they're willing to slow things down for a few months, pretend like they've seen the light, pretend like they can fix it. And then as soon as they take power back, full speed ahead, 4 more years of wide open border policy. And by then, all the big metropolitan areas that are blue will be reapportioned 2, 3, 4 congressional seats. They'll own Congress completely, and then they can just do whatever they want. That's cynically how I look at it.
In terms of, so I wanted to kind of pivot now. You'd brought up President Biden. In Congress, you will be working with the executive branch and whoever president is. Polls came out, I don't know if you saw it today, that had leaked from internal Democratic polling. I think it was Open Labs, and it was all over the internet about the swing post-debate for Biden. You went down 2 points in basically all swing states. Their projection is like 356 for Donald Trump right now. What are your thoughts on the current commander-in-chief post-debate, and what's your reaction to that and how the Democrats are scrambling?
I just think it's hilarious. Everybody woke up on Friday morning and said, "Oh my God, he's got dementia." We never noticed that before. Even though we've been watching, everybody's been screaming about it for 3 years now.
It's okay. Sorry, this is your show, but
let's have a talk.
It baffles me that America is failing. I mean, we are in debt. We are funding these wars. Inflation is out of control. People are having to get 2 and 3 jobs while everyone else is getting laid off. Like, crime is up. We have all these horrific issues going on. And suddenly Friday morning or Thursday night, even, they're like, "Oh no, we don't have a great precedent." And it's like, really? Really? You didn't notice that from like all the crime and the homelessness and the fact that you can't afford to eat anymore? It was just that he got on stage, you couldn't speak, and that's your issue? Like, I'm baffled by that. I'm sorry. I am absolutely baffled by that.
Well, you and I are in agreement. I think to answer your question, I've never agreed with Joe Biden's policies. But, I didn't agree with Obama's policies. I didn't agree with Clinton's policies. And I didn't see any reason to impeach them. I didn't see, I figured we just take our lumps for the time they're in office and do better the next time. Joe Biden's a different case. He's dangerous. I spent 30 years working in emergency rooms. And when people had dementia, they brought mom and dad to the hospital. I'm the one who evaluated them. I'm the one who set out a treatment plan for them. I've seen this. He's got dementia. He probably has Lewy body dementia, and he's dangerous. Other countries were watching the debates that night as well, and I think that the reason that China has been so emboldened, and Russia has been so emboldened, and the Taliban is so emboldened, is because they know he's inherently weak, and there's probably disarray at the White House where it's almost impossible to make a decision because the White House is being run by a committee of Ivy League kids.
It's very sad. My grandpa died in 2020, and a few months before he died, he was definitely showing signs of dementia. And I think he was 93. Prior to that, his brain was very, very sharp. It declined quickly. And
good for him.
My parents, he was living with my parents his last few months, and they had gone out of town to visit one of my sisters. So my other sister went and took care of my grandpa while my parents were gone. And he didn't know who she was anymore. And he thought she was someone named Marianne who was taking care of him. And when my parents got back and they were kind of asking, oh, how did it go? And he was like, oh, Marion was fantastic. She did such a great job. She was so kind to me. And this of course, his granddaughter that he had known for 30 something years. And it was cute and sweet and sad, and in like he's in his last months and he didn't know who she was, but he still enjoyed his time. But I see videos of Biden doing exactly that, where he doesn't know where he is or who anybody is that he's talking to. And it reminds me exactly of my grandpa in his last few months of life. And it's just like, Biden doesn't have much time. This is elder abuse. This is literally elder abuse.
I think Joe Biden will go down in history as one of the most hated people after what she's did to the country and what she did to him.
I think the only first lady who could rival her would be who was Woodrow Wilson's wife, who Edith
Galt, I think.
Yeah, and he was sick in his last couple of years, and she was
he had a stroke, right?
And he couldn't do anything, and she was basically running the country on his behalf and would tell his advisors what to do. So funny story about this debate last week, and it just proves what an echo chamber I think people were in about it. I was at a work event when the debate happened, so I didn't watch any of it. I had gotten home, flipped on CNN to see what the post coverage was, and watched the entire meltdown for 2 hours. I just couldn't stop watching. It was amazing. It was like watching a train wreck or something. And I'm sitting here going, man, it must have been really bad for Joe Biden that CNN of all people is saying we need to replace him. Like, this is, DEFCON 3 or whatever, DEFCON 1. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to watch it the next day. I watch it the next day, and I'm watching it and I go, this is exactly how I expected Joe Biden would do. Like, it didn't shock me. I felt like CNN was exaggerating. But I think it's because people like us are aware of how bad it is.
We were not in denial.
We weren't in denial. So I texted Camille and I said, I feel like CNN was kind of exaggerating, because I watched it and I was like, he did about as well as I thought he was going to do. And he mumbled and stumbled and he got through answers and stuff like that. So it just goes to show you how we're kind of siloed off in our own little tribes in America, where it's like one side could be just so completely blind to what's happening and then wake up one day and go, oh, this is a problem. And the rest of us are going, yeah, this is a problem.
If they won't show it, if you don't watch Fox and you watch the rest of the media and they won't show you anything, how are you supposed to know? Right. Although the reporters should know. They're part of the game. So I honestly think that their reaction was, oh, the jig is up. We've got to save our reputations. And besides, it'd be better for us if we got Gavin in or, Gretchen Whitmer or somebody instead. So I think they just flipped on a dime. There's no loyalty in that group.
No, I think it was like you said it exactly. It's people watched it and they went, there's no way we can fake or say this is a cheap fake or lie or spin about this. This is exactly what it is, and we have to try and save our phony baloney jobs. So we have a couple minutes left, and I want to just kind of get a summary from you. And I know you've mentioned you have to work with other people. We don't know what's going to happen when you get to Congress. But when you get to Congress, you're sworn in January 2025. What are your top 3 priorities when you get to Congress?
Well, we have to stop the border, work with other people in Congress to stop the flow of illegal aliens across the border. Number 2, we have to do something about the economy. I think the best way to do something about the economy is to have realistic energy policies. I think we're throwing our country away based upon these phony baloney energy policies that are hurting people. We could talk about that for a long time, but I think you probably get where I'm going with that. And we have to deal with the homelessness / mental health crisis that's happening in America, and we have to stop that. Those would be my 3 things I'd fixed in the first month, and then I'd go on to other things.
Well, they all sound good to me. Before we finalize, Camille, you have any more questions? I never want to cut you off if you have any follow-up questions.
I don't. Thank you, though.
Where can people find you and support you and donate if they want to support you? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, if you go to wellsforcongress2024.com, and for is FOR, wellsforcongress2024.com, you can learn more about me. You know, I of course need donations, but what I really need is people to volunteer. We're going to be very aggressively ballot harvesting and talking to Republicans who may be lackadaisical about their voting, and encouraging them to vote and helping them get their votes in. And I need manpower to do that. So if you want to help me and you want to volunteer some time with that, it would be fantastic.
I just want to remind everyone, you don't have to live in his district. You can be anywhere in the U.S. to phone bank.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put you to work, I promise. And you know, it's not just for the 51st district. It's for San Diego County, as for the country as a whole. We all have to band together and say enough is enough with the craziness.
All right. Well, you heard him. If you have any time to volunteer or donate, go check out his website. Mayor Bill Wells of El Cajon, congressional candidate for the 51st District of Congress. Thank you so much for coming on. Best of luck. Best of luck in the race. If open invitation, if you want to come back before election time and have more conversation. I'm sure there's stuff we didn't get to talk about in this hour. So if there's anything else you want to discuss, feel free to reach out to us again.
Well, thanks very much. It's a smart show, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. As we always end every show, make sure you like, share, subscribe, review, comment. Helps with the algorithm so more people can find us. And if you want to support this show, the best thing you can do that is 100% free is go share this with somebody else who would be interested. And with that, see you on the next one. Good night.